She left her kids for years, now she wants to be their mom again. But should I let her back into their lives? I raised them alone, and now she thinks she deserves a second chance. I never thought my life would turn out like this. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, staring at legal documents, trying to decide whether I should fight my own sister for custody of her kids. But here I am. I guess I should start from the beginning, before everything fell apart, before I became the only real parent my niece and nephew had. My sister, Leah, and I had always been close. She was my best friend growing up, my partner in crime. Even after we became adults and started our own lives, we still had that bond. She got married young, too young, in my opinion, but she was happy. She had two amazing kids, Emma and Jacob, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Then her husband left. It was sudden. No warning, no long, drawn-out fights, just one day, he was done. Packed his bags and walked out, leaving her completely shattered. She didn't handle it well. I don't think anyone could blame her for falling apart at first. She had given everything to that marriage, to that family, and in an instant, it was gone. At first, I thought she just needed time. So I helped. I picked up the kids from school when she wasn't up for it. Made them dinner when she said she was too exhausted. Sat with them on nights when they asked why their dad didn't love them anymore and Leah was locked in her bedroom, drinking herself unconscious. But what started as occasional help turned into everyday reality. Days blurred into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Leah stopped trying. She started disappearing, sometimes for an entire weekend, leaving no explanation, no call, no text. Just gone. The first time it happened, I panicked. I called her a dozen times, thinking something horrible had happened to her. When she finally responded, she just laughed it off, saying she'd gone out with some friends and forgot to check her phone. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't healing. She wasn't coming back. And I was no longer just an uncle. I was raising these kids. I just didn't realize it yet. I don't know when exactly it happened, the moment when I stopped helping and started raising them. There was no dramatic turning point, no single event that made it clear. It just happened. One night, I was tucking them into bed while Leah was out God knows where, and Jacob, barely 5 at the time, looked up at me with those big, tired eyes and called me Dad. I froze. Emma, who was 7, quickly corrected him, giggling, but I saw the way she looked at me. She was waiting to see how I would react. I just smiled and ruffled his hair, brushing it off. But inside, I felt something break. Not because it hurt. But because I knew why he said it. I was the one who made their breakfast in the morning. The one who packed their lunches and took them to school. The one who sat through parent-teacher conferences while other kids' parents showed up together, and their mom was nowhere to be found. I had told myself for months that this was just temporary. That Leah was struggling, but she would pull herself together eventually. That I was just helping out until she got back on her feet. But she wasn't trying. And the kids? They weren't waiting for her anymore. They were looking to me. And I couldn't let them down. Leah's disappearances became more frequent. At first, she had at least pretended to care, sending texts about how work was exhausting or how she was just having a girls' night. But eventually, even the excuses stopped. I'd wake up in the morning, and she'd be gone. And the kids would barely react. That was the worst part. At some point, they had stopped expecting her to be there. They just adjusted. And so did I. I rearranged my entire life around them without even thinking about it. I adjusted my work schedule. I gave up nights out. I started putting them first, because if I didn't, no one else would. Then one night, Leah came home at dawn, stumbling through the door drunk. She smelled like alcohol and cigarettes, her hair was a mess, and she could barely string a sentence together. I told her she needed to get her shit together, that the kids were noticing, that they were hurting. She just rolled her eyes. I'll never forget what she said before passing out on the couch. "They'll be fine. They have you." That was when I finally admitted it to myself. She wasn't coming back. I wasn't helping anymore. I was their only real parent now. And deep down, I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to give them back. Leah's disappearances had become so routine that I stopped expecting her to come back at all. I still held on to some hope, though. Some ridiculous, desperate hope that she'd walk through the door one day and say, "I'm ready. I'm here. I'm going to be their mom again." That hope finally died one night when Emma got sick. It started with a fever, nothing serious at first. I gave her medicine, tucked her into bed, and told her she'd feel better in the morning. But by midnight, she was burning up, her little body trembling, her breathing shallow. I tried calling Leah. I don't know why. Maybe because, despite everything, she was still their mother. Maybe because I was desperate, scared, and didn't want to feel like I was doing this alone. She didn't answer. I called again. Then again. Then 5 more times after that. Voicemail. Every time. Meanwhile, Emma kept getting worse. I scooped her up, grabbed Jacob by the hand, and rushed them both to the emergency room. I don't even remember the drive, just the feeling of pure panic gripping my chest. The doctors ran tests, gave her fluids, monitored her breathing. They told me it was a bad viral infection, but she'd be okay. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt rage. Because while I was sitting in a freezing hospital room, holding Emma's hand as she drifted in and out of sleep, Leah was God knows where, probably drinking, partying, laughing like she didn't have 2 kids who still cried for her in their sleep. The next morning, when Emma's fever finally broke and I brought them home, I saw that Leah had finally texted me back. A single message. No apology. No concern. Just a casual, "What's up?" I didn't respond. That was the moment I knew. Leah wasn't coming back. Not really. She wasn't a mother anymore. I was. After that night in the hospital, something in me changed. I had spent months lying to myself, convincing myself that this was all temporary. That Leah was just lost, that she would snap out of it, that I was just keeping things afloat until she was ready to be their mom again. But that was a fantasy. The reality was this: I was already their father. I was the one cooking their meals. I was the one making sure Emma brushed her teeth and Jacob didn't sneak candy before bed. I was the one signing their school permission slips, teaching Emma how to tie her shoes properly, explaining to Jacob why the sky turned orange during sunsets. I was the one who showed up. Every day. Leah was nothing more than a fading memory to them. Her absence was no longer shocking, it was expected. That truth finally hit me when Jacob had a school play. He had been practicing his lines for weeks, bouncing around the house with excitement. The morning of the performance, he asked me if his mom was going to be there. I told him I'd try to get in touch with her. I don't know why I even bothered. Maybe a small part of me still wanted to believe she'd at least show up for something. But when the lights dimmed and the kids took the stage, the seat I had saved for her was still empty. Jacob didn't even look for her in the crowd. After the play, when he ran up to me with the biggest smile on his face, holding up his little certificate of participation, I expected him to ask where his mom was. Instead, he hugged me and said, "Did I do good, Dad?" And just like that, it was final. He wasn't just slipping up anymore. He wasn't mistaking me for someone else. He meant it. Emma stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but I saw it in her eyes. She knew too. She had known for a long time. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and ruffled his hair. That was the day I stopped waiting for Leah to come back. Because I knew, if she ever did, it wouldn't be for them. It would be for herself. Life had finally settled into something steady. The chaos was behind us, the uncertainty gone. The kids had a routine, a home filled with love, and a sense of normalcy that had been missing for far too long. Leah wasn't a part of that. Every once in a while, she would send a message, short, meaningless texts with no real effort behind them. She never asked how the kids were doing, never made plans to see them. It was as if she had accepted that she wasn't their mother anymore. And I had started to accept it too. I had begun the process of legal guardianship. It wasn't about punishing Leah, it was about protecting them. Giving them something permanent. Something stable. If Leah wasn't going to be there, then I needed to make sure they would never feel like they were in limbo again. Then, just when I had started to believe we had truly moved forward, Leah came back. She arrived unannounced, standing on my doorstep like no time had passed. Her appearance caught me off guard. She looked healthy. Not the hollow, distant version of herself I had last seen, but someone who had pulled herself together. She said she was doing better. She said she had gone to therapy, stopped drinking, and found a job. She said she was ready to be a mother again. I wanted to believe her. But I couldn't forget the nights Emma had cried herself to sleep. I couldn't erase the image of Jacob sitting by the door, waiting for a mother who never showed up. Leah said she had changed. But I had seen too much to trust her words alone. And the worst part? The kids barely recognized her. Jacob peeked at her from behind my leg, hesitant, uncertain. Emma didn't say a word, just stared at her, her face unreadable. Leah had come back expecting a warm reunion. But she had been gone too long. And no matter how much she had changed, I wasn't sure she deserved another chance. Leah stood on my doorstep, waiting for something that wasn't there. A hug. A warm welcome. A reunion. But the kids didn't run to her. They didn't cry tears of joy or bury themselves in her arms. Instead, they hesitated, watching her like she was a stranger. Because in many ways, she was. Jacob clung to my leg, peeking up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Emma stood stiffly beside me, saying nothing, her face unreadable. Leah's expression faltered. She had expected a different reaction, maybe forgiveness, maybe excitement. She had come back with a story of redemption, a version of herself she wanted us to believe in. She looked at me, her voice carefully measured, telling me how much she had changed. She talked about therapy, about getting sober, about rebuilding her life. She spoke about regret, about how much she missed her children, about how she was ready to be a mother again. But words were easy. And I had spent years watching her break every promise she ever made. I didn't tell her to leave. Not yet. I let her step inside, let her sit across from the kids and try to make conversation. She asked Jacob about school. He answered in short sentences, glancing at me after every word, like he was checking to see if this was okay. Emma barely spoke. She kept her arms crossed, her jaw tight, nodding politely but offering nothing more. Leah kept trying, but the weight of her absence filled the room. The long years of silence, the missed birthdays, the nights they had spent wondering if she was ever coming home, those things didn't just disappear because she decided she was ready now. After a while, Leah sighed, running a hand through her hair. She looked at me, her voice softer now, as she said the words I had been dreading. She wanted her kids back. She wanted to be their mother again. She was ready to fight for them if she had to. My hands clenched into fists. I had always prepared for this possibility, but hearing her say it out loud made my stomach twist. This wasn't just about what I wanted. It wasn't even about what Leah wanted. It was about what was best for them. And I wasn't sure I could trust Leah to put them first. Not after everything she had done. Not after how easily she had walked away. Leah sat across from me, waiting for a reaction. She had just said she wanted the kids back. That she was ready to be their mother again. That she would fight for them if she had to. I felt my jaw tighten, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. She had no idea what she was asking. For years, I had been the one drying their tears, making them breakfast, teaching them how to ride their bikes. I had been the one comforting Emma after nightmares, the one holding Jacob's hand at doctor's appointments. I had been their parent when she wasn't there. And now, she wanted to walk back in and take them. I forced myself to stay calm, to listen. She talked about how hard things had been for her. How she had lost herself after her husband left. How she had needed time to heal. She told me she had been selfish, but she had fixed it now. She was sober. She had a steady job. She had spent months in therapy, learning how to be the mother they needed. It all sounded good. But good wasn't enough. I had seen her lie before, seen her make promises that meant nothing. And even if she was telling the truth, where had this realization been 2 years ago? I glanced at the kids. Jacob had inched closer to me, his little hands gripping my sleeve, still unsure of what was happening. Emma hadn't moved at all. She just sat there, arms crossed, her face carefully blank. But I could see the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't buying it. Leah kept talking, kept explaining. She said she was their mother. That nothing could change that. And that was the problem. Because she thought being their mother was enough. That sharing blood gave her some automatic right to walk back in and take them from the only home they had known for years. But she wasn't their mother in the ways that mattered. She hadn't been there for Emma's first heartbreak or Jacob's first lost tooth. She hadn't been the one sitting at the kitchen table late at night, helping with homework. She had missed it all. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice steady as I told her the truth. It wasn't her decision to make anymore. It was theirs. And from the way Emma refused to look at her, from the way Jacob wouldn't let go of my sleeve, I already knew what they would choose. Leah had come here expecting a reunion. But she was starting to realize, she wasn't part of this family anymore. Leah had expected this to go differently. She had walked in, confident and sure, thinking that her words would be enough. That saying she had changed, that she was better now, would undo the years of absence, the broken promises, the nights her children had cried themselves to sleep without her. But this wasn't about her anymore. She sat across from me, waiting for an answer. But it wasn't mine to give. I turned to the kids. Jacob was still gripping my sleeve, his small fingers wrapped around the fabric like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. His eyes darted between me and Leah, uncertain, confused, too young to understand everything, but old enough to know something big was happening. Emma, though, she understood exactly what was going on. She sat stiffly, her arms crossed over her chest, staring at Leah like she was trying to figure out if she was even worth speaking to. There was no excitement on her face. No relief. No happiness. Just caution. Leah finally spoke again, softer this time, asking Emma if she wanted to come home. Emma didn't hesitate. She shook her head. Jacob looked up at me, then back at Leah. He didn't say anything, but his grip on my sleeve tightened. I knew what that meant. Leah blinked, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Like this was supposed to go differently. Like she had expected them to run into her arms, to beg to come back, to welcome her home without hesitation. She was their mother, after all. But she didn't realize that being a mother isn't just a title. It's actions. It's choices. It's showing up. And she hadn't. She had chosen to leave. Chosen to disappear. And now, they were choosing, too. And they weren't choosing her. Her face crumbled, just for a second. But then something else flickered in her eyes, something sharp, something defensive. She wasn't going to accept this. She sat up straighter, her voice a little firmer now, telling me that she wasn't giving up. That she was their mother, and she had a right to be in their lives. I felt a slow, deep exhale leave my chest. Because this was exactly what I had feared. This wasn't over. Leah wasn't just going to walk away. She was going to fight. Leah wasn't leaving without a fight. I could see it in her eyes, the way her shoulders squared, the way she braced herself like she had been wronged somehow. Like she was the victim in all this. She said she had a right to her children. That no matter how much time had passed, no matter what had happened, she was still their mother. But rights didn't mean anything when you had abandoned your kids. She started talking about custody, about how she would get a lawyer, about how she would prove that she was stable now, that she was ready. It didn't matter that the kids had already chosen. It didn't matter that Emma had barely looked at her, that Jacob had clung to me like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. In her mind, this wasn't about them. It was about winning. For the first time in years, I felt a different kind of anger toward her. Not the quiet disappointment I had carried for so long, not the frustration of watching her self-destruct. This was rage. Because she didn't care what this would do to them. She didn't care that she would be ripping them from the only stable life they had ever known. That she would be forcing them to go back to a person they no longer trusted, no longer knew, just because she had suddenly decided she was ready. I had spent years picking up the pieces she left behind. And now, she wanted to take them back like they were just another piece of her life that she had finally decided was worth fixing. I told her the truth. If she wanted to go to court, I would be right there to fight back. I wasn't just going to hand them over because she had finally decided to care. I wasn't going to let her walk back in and pretend the past didn't exist. Jacob and Emma weren't hers to take anymore. They were mine. And I was going to do everything in my power to keep them safe. Leah's expression hardened. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and told me I'd be hearing from her soon. Then she walked out the door. And just like that, the fight I had spent years dreading had finally begun. After Leah walked out, the house felt different. Heavier. Quieter. Emma sat on the couch, arms still crossed, staring at the door like she was daring Leah to come back. Jacob was curled up beside me, his small hands gripping my arm, his body tense. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the question in him, the worry that if Leah wanted to take them back badly enough, she somehow could. I ran a hand through his hair, trying to reassure him even though my own chest felt tight. Because I didn't know what Leah was going to do next. For days, I waited for the legal threats to start, for the court papers to arrive. I spent hours talking to lawyers, preparing for the worst. I went through every detail of my life with the kids, every late-night hospital visit, every school meeting, every missed call from Leah, every text she never sent. If she wanted a fight, I was ready. But the fight never came. Instead, after a week of silence, Leah sent a single message. She wasn't going to pursue custody. No explanations. No apologies. Just a statement. She was giving up. I should have felt relief. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was exhaustion. Because this had never been about me winning. It had been about keeping Emma and Jacob safe. About making sure they never had to wonder if they would be taken away from the only home they knew. And now, they didn't have to. That night, as I tucked Jacob into bed, he reached up and wrapped his arms around my neck, whispering, "I love you, Dad." Emma, standing in the doorway, didn't say anything. But as I walked past her room, she gave me a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement that this was over. Leah had been their mother once. But now, she was nothing more than a memory. And we were finally free to move forward, as a family.